Joining us now is our senior political editor, Steve Chaggaris, and our director of elections, Anthony Salvanto. And I'd like to start with you, Steve. Let's talk about, what did you make of his speech? It was a pretty passionate speech.
Pretty passionate. I just felt that he went to the conservative butcher shop and picked up as much red meat as he could to bring it to this audience. I mean, he had all the talking points you'd expect a conservative candidate to talk about. Abolishing the IRS, abolishing Obamacare, securing the border, I mean, you name it, guns. He really hit sort of every point that you would expect a conservative, a really strict conservative to hit. This crowd, it's an interesting crowd. It's a young, evangelical, conservative crowd. Granted, now keep in mind that it was a mandatory event for them to show up, but they seemed to be pretty excited and interested in what he had to say. And there were a lot of moments of loud applause, especially when he mentioned Obamacare and standing with Israel. And
he also got reaction from folks in the crowd from Austin, and then also from folks apparently with connections to Kenya. So it seems somewhat diverse. What did you make of his family and his background?
Well, it's interesting. He used that as sort of like the launching point. And it is a pretty diverse background. I mean, his father's Cuban, his mom is American. There are questions actually that will be raised and have been raised about his citizenship, considering he was born in Canada. And he did reference Calgary in his remarks, so it'll be interesting to see going forth what happens there. Legal experts have said it's not an issue, but I wouldn't be surprised if people bring that issue up moving forward. But he tried to basically say not only was his family sort of a working middle-class family, but bringing religion into it too, as how his dad almost left his family until he found Jesus and found Christianity and brought the family back together. So this was his audience to tell that story.
All right, let's bring in Anthony Salvanto now. And how important is it for the Christian conservatives to rally around him at this point?
It's very important. You know, most of voters in some of those early states, particularly in Iowa, will call themselves evangelical Christians. So in a race like this, which is probably going to be a crowded field, you don't need to win everybody, but you do need to win a certain component of that base. And making that appeal certainly is going to be part of his strategy. Certainly it's going to be part of, you don't need to win, say, even 30 or 40% of everybody. You need to win 20, 25% if the field is crowded. And you can do that if you win over evangelical conservatives.
Now, you mentioned that at this point, it's not whether or not he can win, especially in Iowa, it's whether or not he can compete with the expected crowd of GOP runners.
Exactly. You know, you look at the appeals he made today and the ones he's made previously. Look at maybe the Tea Party. Now, the Tea Party didn't have a big candidate in 2012, and they lost a number of primaries in 2014. So there's a base out there. It's 4 in 10 Republicans that call themselves at least supporters of the Tea Party movement. And you notice he also talked a lot about being a courageous conservative and fighting for what
does that mean?
Well, my guess would be that he's trying to make hay out of the things that brought him into the spotlight. And that is that during the battles in the legislature, during the battles in Congress over Obamacare, during the government shutdown of 2013, there was a base of Republicans, about 4 in 10, that thought that the party compromised too much. Right, that wants to keep fighting, that wants to draw that line in the sand. And so I think they're going to maybe hear that message maybe from him, and that's where he's probably going with this.
Steve, I want to bring you in for a second because he was voted into the Senate on a Tea Party wave in 2012. He beat somebody with decades of experience. He definitely made a name for himself in a short amount of time, but did he irk some of the key Republican players, such as Senator John McCain?
Well, yeah, I mean, not just McCain, but most of the Republican leadership in Congress. I mean, he's basically been an outsider since he's been in. He's not made a lot of friends there. He has pushed back. He's gone behind the backs of some of the leaders to meet with some of the insurgent-type Republicans on the House and Senate side to cause a bit of trouble. And I think, you know, what you see, if you see Cruz actually getting some traction in this race over the next several months, I think you will see establishment-type Republicans, not necessarily moderates, but just establishment Republicans, start to push back against Cruz, because I don't think they envision Cruz as the type of Republican they see as the nominee of the party.
Well, Anthony, as you know, a lot of politicians, they don't want to be connected with the establishment, so could that possibly help him?
I think Steve is right, but it'll be interesting to see if he uses that pushback as a way to appeal to a voter base that is dissatisfied with Washington, that is against what they see as the establishment. And that's sort of ill-defined, what the establishment is, but it really means people have been in power for a long time. And there's a Tea Party base that will say, oh, well, if the establishment, quote unquote, is against him, then maybe he's worth a look. And I think that's where he's trying to appeal to.
So now he's in line basically with the base on policy points, correct? But what does he have to do to stand out besides that? Yeah,
he is in line, but that's not necessarily going to differentiate him from a lot of his competitors. Some, but not all. So when he talks about repealing Obamacare, well, a majority of Republicans say they'd like to repeal Obamacare entirely. Not the general public, but not all Americans, but Republicans do. But it's going to be, I think, as much about tactics and approach as it is about points of policy. And that comes back to this idea of being, fighting, standing up, doing whatever it takes to get your policy points across.
And Steve, do you think he has a bit of an edge right now by announcing his candidacy this early? We know that some of the big heavy hitters like Jeb Bush will be announcing their candidacy pretty soon.
Well, that's what he's hoping. I mean, he needs to differentiate himself. Like Anthony said, there are a lot of people in similar lanes as Ted Cruz. So he's up against people like Rand Paul, Ben Carson, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, even Bobby Jindal, Marco Rubio, Rick Perry to a certain extent, and even Scott Walker. They're all fighting for similar voters, and so he's got to get out there and get some attention to what he's doing. He's got to bring some money in to show that he's a viable candidate. So, I mean, whether this helps him or not, it remains to be seen. I think what he's basically trying to say, especially using the setting, talking to evangelical conservatives, is saying, look, I'm the guy that you want to back. Even though Mike Huckabee won Iowa in 2008 and Rick Santorum won in 2012, I'm the guy this year. And you should get behind me this year for at least among evangelical conservatives.
And Anthony, you mentioned, when we were talking about his background and his family history, that was really important to make himself stand out.
I think so. Republicans are going to have to talk about inequality, and however defined. We talk about the Republicans are often tarred by Democrats as being the party of the rich, but the fact is that the bulk of their voters are middle class. And even lower middle class. And those voters have expressed concern about the economy in the last two elections and in poll after poll. So they're going to have to address that. And maybe one of the ways they do is to talk about, and most politicians do this sort of up from the roots story, this sort of up from nothing story. So he'll emphasize that. And the other thing going forward is, as Steve mentioned, there's going to be a lot of candidates. The question to look at is not how they stand relative to each other in the horse race now, it's where can they go? What kinds of constituencies are they after? And certainly voters who are concerned about the economy, concerned about that inequality, that's another open space, I think, for everybody.
All right, a lot to watch. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much. And Steve Chaggaris in Washington for us. We really appreciate it.